I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a sec, but hopefully, actually, it was really interesting to hear Layla's talk just now, because I think she talked quite a lot about the theory of cultural relevance and cultural contribution. So this is hopefully a little bit of it actually in practice. As we just said, I'm Alex Goh. I'm Chief Exec of Youth-Led Creative Livity. You may well have met some of our cultural insiders earlier on today already. We're here to talk about something quite specific. So brands and artists and music have had a long history. And in preparation for this, I was actually talking to our creative director, James, just the other day, and we were talking about our shared first big musical experience, and that was going to see Michael Jackson's Bad tour in 1989. And we got there, and everything was branded Pepsi. And for those of you who are old enough in the room to remember that, you will remember that that was the beginning of a very long and beautiful relationship between a very iconic artist and a very iconic drinks brand. So music has a long time been a way for brands to appropriate so-called culture and a shortcut to access audiences. Now, I guess that we've all come to expect that of major talent, and we know that the challenges with commercial models of record labels means that that is how the mainstream keeps themselves in trainers and sequins these days. So that's, I guess, the jumping off point for this, which is that's okay for the mainstream. But how do we as people, so this is not us here, I'm asking you as marketeers, but actually as human beings, how do we feel about brands becoming the cool hunters of underground music scenes? At Livity, we work with young people every day. We know across music, but also across enterprise and general young people's lives, they're self-funding, they're self-producing, they're self-promoting. No young person from a music point of view is waiting for their record contract to fall out of the sky, and they're also not willing to compromise. So, is this an opportunity for talent and brands to benefit each other? Does it still have a stigma attached? Does the power of a global drinks brand behind a subculture immediately make it a sellout? So we've heard already today about brand storytelling, about influencers, around cultural contributions, and brands as publishers. So with more and more brands and businesses describing themselves as cultural marketeers, it's probably time we had this discussion. So before I introduce our panel, I'd like you all just to have a think about which side of the argument you guys are on. Should brands stop hijacking youth culture, or should we be thankful to brands for being this century's amplifier to grassroots talent? In a couple of minutes, I'm going to play you just a couple of clips to sort of set the scene. But I'd like to introduce our panel. This is Tara Joshi. You're a freelance music writer. You write for Noisy, for the FT, for Vice, and for Red Bull. Next, we have Kev McFadden, who's head of brand communications at Nando's. We have Ben Sorgana, who is a music agent, co-founder of music agency Attachment London, Beyond Sahara, and the Rebel Book Club. And then at the end, we have Toy and Rob, who are house music producers. So they are going to be answering some of these questions here today. But just to set the scene, as I say, we're not necessarily talking about mainstream talent here. There's a couple of examples, so it'd be interesting to get people's views on this. The first one is a collaboration between ASOS and Elf Kid. So this is an up-and-coming artist who's had an opportunity to create their own music platform and music video, and actually bringing together the roots of grime with African culture. Obviously, there are ASOS clothes in the video.
Let's vibe to this. Heard the beat and had to ride to it. You don't know we gotta fight for it. Bring you close to my environment. Watch how they move to the beat. They dance with no shoes.
And the next one is a slightly more obvious product placement. See if you can see where that comes in. But again, it's kind of two ends of the spectrum here.
When you say sorry, not sorry, sorry, not sorry. Wait. You hit me up in the DMs later, telling me you can't look straight. Can I stay at your place? Invade your personal space. Text them goodnight from my phone. A drunk luxury just before your eyes close.
Again, you get the gist. So I'm going to hand over to our panel now. Tara, I'm going to start with you. Question, artists collaborating with brands, is it ever a good thing?
So I think that we can all agree that the model through which we consume music has changed so much in the past 20 years. And I mean, maybe I just speak for myself, but as someone who is a music journalist, I still don't buy a lot of music. So I think it's no longer reasonable to expect an artist to not collaborate with a brand just because you have this concept of them being underground, and selling out is not a thing when you're not paying an artist anymore. So I think it is okay, it has to be okay, but it's the terms through which you do that. It's about how much space the artist actually has to do what they want to be doing, how considered the collaboration is, because I think it's immediately obvious if it's, if it's a brand just piggybacking on something they think is cool, or trying to push Red Bull through something like that, then it's just, if it's not subtle, it's not going to work.
Ben?
Yeah, I agree. I think where it often goes wrong is when brands forget that artists are artists, not designers, and they're not there to be briefed, they're there to have creative freedom. I think when artists and brands come together in a genuine collaboration with shared objectives and shared values, that's when it can go right. But it can go horribly wrong when you're trying to shoehorn a brand message into an artist's agenda, and I think that's when the tension goes the wrong way. It stops being creative tension and starts being something else.
Yeah, I think it just needs to be win-win on both sides. So as long as the artist gets value and the brand gets value, and there's not an imbalance there, then it makes sense on both sides.
Kev, to that point, shared objectives and shared values. How do you get that as someone? You collaborate with music artists in Nando's, and you have done previously in your other roles. How do you get to that? How do you get to those shared objectives?
I think that was the marketing buzz term of just having genuine human conversations with people who you understand and who understand you. At Nando's, we only ever start working with people who are already fans of our brand. So the relationship's already authentic. It's already people who come to Nando's, who spend time in Nando's, and therefore it's an easy conversation to start because we have that in common, right? We both like to go to Nando's, and then if that is genuine and authentic, then we can move on to the next stage of relationship, which might be that we want to do something together. We've got an audience, they've got an audience. Often that audience is the same audience. And if we want to work together with something, then we just have a really honest and genuine conversation about what we'd like to achieve and what they'd like to achieve. And sometimes those two things line up. Often they don't. And when they don't line up, you shouldn't be afraid to walk away from that, because you're going to end up in a bad place. So it's about finding those genuine collaborations that are working.
Ben, from your side of things, I mean, from a music agency point of view, how do you do that? How do you put some of those collaborations together when you're not actually the brand holder yourself? How do you do that? How do you create that kind of level of honesty between brands and
I think
organizations?
to begin with, it's relationships, right? So we work really closely on an artist side, know lots of managers and artists for a long time, and equally have worked in the brand space for quite a long time. So kind of knowing both sides' needs and pain points makes it quite easy. And then I think for us, the key thing, and probably the key takeaway for you guys, is more around timings than anything else. And it's about, what we do is look at an artist's diary for the next 18 months and know this artist has got material coming now, they want to make noise at this point, and this brand has got something at the same sort of time, and it's how do we align those things. So a good example, like Thursday evening, for example, we've got Gwen Stefani over to do the Christmas switch on at Westfield, and to get Gwen Stefani to do something at a shopping centre, like on paper isn't the most exciting partnership, but she's releasing a Christmas album, which is out now, and she can do a performance to 6,500 people, and it basically pays, it's not a big check for her, but it pays for her to come to the UK, do a load of TV, do a load of radio, and the whole thing makes sense, and Westfield get Superstar for a much smaller check.
And how about to you guys, and Toy and Robert, at the end? I mean, if we're talking about Gwen Stefani, that's obviously kind of mainstream talent. But what about, we're talking about subcultures, what about underground music scenes? How do you guys feel? Have you been approached by brands? How does that work?
I mean, I think the key thing from the artist's point of view is actually really, really good to be able to link up with brands, especially when you're up and coming, before you're at Gwen Stefani level, because you could tap into the base that those brands already have, and they can help propel you and get your name out there further. I mean, a really good, really strong branding campaign that I know we discussed before is Stormzy, the grime artist, and Adidas. So Stormzy was a big Adidas wearer, and he was blowing up in a really big way. Sorry, on a huge day, a huge one on the underground. So it made sense for Adidas and him to partner up because he'd be wearing their clothes anyway. And then they went one step further and they had him launching, announcing that Man United has signed Paul Pogba, because Stormzy's a Man United fan as well. So it all started off from that grassroots level, where initially it helped get Stormzy's name out there even further. and then they were able to take it further than that.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, I think you've got to be able to say no to things as well. If it's like, if Nike approached Stormzy, he doesn't appear to wear Nike in a lot of his music videos, but they could have offered him a huge check, said, come wear our clothes, but it would have taken away from what he was doing before. So it's got to be in line with where your vision is, and both of you have got to get something out of it. So there's sort of twofold. You've got to be able to say yes to the things you want to do, but you've got to have enough sort of substance and backbone to turn around and say that's not right for me, even if it is a big payer or whatever.
And how does it differ when we're talking about a specific artist or an actual whole scene? Because there have been brands that I guess have kind of appropriated whole music genres. And is that a good thing? Is there an authenticity there, or is it a sellout? Tara, I don't know whether you've got any.
Well, I mean, if you look at a brand like Vans, I think they've done a really, really good job of tapping into and providing something for the rock scene. Like the Vans Warped Tour, I know is coming to an end now, but I think if a rock band were to do a tie-in with Vans, no one would really question it. But with that said, I think in general there are certain scenes where it's deemed as more appropriate to do a commercial tie-in. So I think, for example, with Stormzy, with any grime artists, with hip-hop artists, because what they're doing musically is kind of aspirational, I suppose, and so I think that they have always been into these brands, and so I don't think it's not seen as setting out for Skepta to be doing a tie-in or whereas I think with guitar music, I think that stigma still kind of exists, and I don't know. Yeah.
I would say there's longer running partnerships, like you would say Rock and Vans. That seems it's got a lot more lifespan. It might last 10, 15, 20 years. Some brands, they need to capitalize on scenes that might only be here for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Grime had its moment first time round, completely died. People like Skepta would be on sort of, they'd be in the charts, but they wouldn't be seen as credible and underground how they're viewed again now. It's had its second sort of second wind, so to speak, and brands just realise it's not necessarily cash cow, but it's time to get involved, and they might not know how long that's going to last, but you've got to just sort of strike while the iron's hot sometimes.
I think it's celebrated now as well, really. Like when Skepta did the Uniqlo deal, it's like the whole scene got behind him, and they were proud to see Skepta on that level, on Oxford Street, getting that kind of recognition. So when we talk to managers and they look at their plans, brands are a key part of that now, whether that's just unlocking resource, so it might be free studio time in exchange for something at like a really basic level or something much bigger. But I think, yeah, it's a key part now of actually breaking an artist is how do we get them on new platforms to reach new audiences, and how do we kind of maintain keeping our costs as low as possible at the start of their career. So photo shoots, video shoots, co-branded content, these are all kind of wins for an artist, and I feel are generally celebrated unless it's obviously not a natural fit.
Just to continue Tara's point as well, another one is like Red Bull and their culture clash. So you know how you asked whether brands are taking over whole scenes. I don't think it's so much that, but I think someone like Red Bull with their culture clash has tapped into, well, there's a scene there, and there's a way that we can get involved and help put on this great show and this whole clash where we celebrate, as Ben said as well, celebrate the whole scene. So I don't think it's so much piggybacking, but if there is a way where you can tie in all aspects of a genre or movement and stuff, I think it's wise for brands to do that.
I've got a question maybe for you, Kev. We've talked about Red Bull, we've talked about Vans, we've talked about Adidas. They all feel like they've got quite a natural role to play in youth culture. What if you're in the audience? What if you're a bank? What if you're a makeup brand? Where does that sit? Well, we've talked about being generous. We've talked about being aspirational. Yeah. Like, is there a role for those kind of brands to play in youth culture and in music specifically?
So I was just reflecting on what you guys were saying, and I was actually going to chip in at the end, but it's the same point, which is that I think brands have got to be really careful in music or in any artistic space or any particular genre to make sure they don't trip themselves up with a lack of authenticity. So the problem that brands like, or industries like banks or categories like banks will have, or financial services, is where are they really adding value to the relationship with an artist, and where they've got a genuine role to play in that cultural space. And that can be earned, but you've got to go there gently, slowly, surely, and earn it credibly with the right partnerships and doing it in a meaningful way. I mean, banks are famous for getting involved in arts, but generally through fine art and through sponsoring galleries and stuff. And often that's about the fact that they have part of their investment portfolio is about supporting artists that are going to grow in their investment over time. So for banks, it's about just finding the right place for them to spend their time and invest in the right things that make sense for them as an industry. I think that's critical across everything. So where are you going to add value as a brand, and where can you stand behind your support?
I've got one more question. Are there any questions out in the audience? Otherwise, I've got another question. Oh, yeah? Oh, right. Okay, well, one of them was around, so we just talked about being generous and authenticity around that. Obviously, there's got to be some sort of brand benefit from that. We're talking about, we've talked a lot about branded content this afternoon. How far do you go? How much does this a brand play? How much is that content kind of branded, or how much should brands be genuinely generous with supporting grassroots music industries?
I think this is one of the few examples where 1 + 1 can really equal 3. If you get a partnership right with an artist, it can really be mutually beneficial and be more than the sum of the parts. But it has to be grounded, as I say, in authenticity, and it has to be this mutually beneficial dynamic that's going on. It's almost like an alchemy. The way we approach it is that we're looking to remain, we've been lucky as a brand that we've been adopted by youth culture. And we want to remain a brand of youth culture. And what youth culture is interested in is emerging talent and emerging music scenes. Now, it just so happens that as a brand, we're also interested in supporting emerging talent, because the people that own Nando's believe that businesses should not just make money, but should also contribute to society. So for us, there's a bit of a synergy there between the fact that we can invest in talent and support them and do more as a brand than just make money. And also we can, at the same time, if we invest in the right talent, tell their story to an audience that we already have, that they're trying to reach, that's more meaningful for the audience and gives them reach that they're looking for. So there's this kind of mutually beneficial relationship between us wanting to be relevant for this audience and this talent over here wanting to reach that audience that we want to help and support. So those 3 things make sense together.
Anyone else want to add anything to that point?
No, I was just going to say, actually, just thinking aside of a Nando's thing, actually. Sometimes you get some results from collaborations that are unexpected. You gave Bipolar Sunshine a Nando's Black Card, and this was a couple of years ago. Not you personally, but a couple of years ago, they gave me Nando's Black Card, and I'm pretty sure might be a little Instagram post and that's it. But he went and used his Black Card to go and buy loads of food and distribute it to loads of homeless people in Manchester, and that bit of content is priceless. It wasn't asked to be done. He would have done it out of sort of the goodness of his heart, and then that is sort of better than any sort of paid sort of partnership that you could really do. So there are some unexpected results from collaborations, and I think sometimes by doing things like that they are sort of the best ones for a brand. So it's important to just do things sometimes just for no real reason, you might get some unexpected results.
I think as well to add, sometimes the results in these cases aren't always that tangible. Nando's are here to sell chicken, right? So you've probably got a KPI on sales rooted somewhere, but at the end of the day, some of these things are just around credibility, and it's really difficult to measure word of mouth. And I think music's a really powerful tool to drive credibility and reach a new audience. And beyond the kind of classic metrics and KPIs, there is value there. And sometimes you can't always touch that, but I think you've just got to believe that long term, if you keep chipping away and doing really cool things, whether it's emerging artists or whoever, it will add value to your brand at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think.
Sorry, can I just say,
yeah?
Sorry, one last thing. As Ben said there, I think with a lot of things with music and these kind of the arts culture, is that they're more movements and they're lifestyles. So in terms as Ben said, you might not see results straight away, but having said that though, if you have an artist that's partnered up with Nando's and they're more from the urban culture, you might find a load of people, the youngsters might be like, God, they keep rapping about Nando's, keep seeing them Nando's, why don't we go check out Nando's instead of Morley's Chicken, kind of thing. But also in the house world, you have a lot of people where definitely it's not just about the music side of things or anything, it's just whole lifestyle, and people do start living these lifestyles, whether it's daily or whether it's on weekends. So you will start to see over time that it's people buying into a lifestyle, not necessarily one aspect of the branding thing, I think. That's all right.
I was going to open it up. Has anyone got any questions in the audience? Oh, sorry, Mike, sorry. Thanks.
Question time.
Hiya. Yeah, just a quick one back to your bank and makeup artists and stuff. I just think that not every partnership between, say, underground artists in this instance needs to be like shouted about and like at the forefront of what people are seeing, because in the bank sort of situation, everyone needs a bank. And I know that NatWest, for example, they're like big on getting students to create a student account. And if you're an artist, you could simply just, I don't know, shoot your video outside NatWest and have it in there. And then those students, they need to understand who the bank needs to understand who those students are listening to. So I think it's also tapping into, again, kind of what the culture wants, because I feel like no better respect comes from a brand investing in grassroots talent. Like, people always follow that and then respect the brand for that. So I do feel like banks and corporate places or corporate organizations have a place and role to play in sort of nurturing that underground talent and grassroots talent. But I feel like they're kind of elite spaces, so you're not going to find those people reaching out to you because they just don't feel like they can get there, or they're not necessarily sort of the type of brand that the type of artist or whatever you would invest in. So I feel like that's something that people shouldn't sort of go away from.
I agree with you, and I think that for me personally, it's just about creating a value exchange. So I used to work for O2, and O2 is a telecommunications company. They've no real right to be in music, and yet they sponsor the biggest music venue in the world, and they sponsor 19 academy venues around the UK. But what they give their customers is access. So every O2 customer gets two days of free access to buying tickets of the gigs that are held in those venues before anyone else. And that's invaluable to an O2 customer, and it makes you, as a customer, if you're interested in music, consider them before you might consider another brand, because you want that access. So I think that's that value exchange for me, when it's there, makes that partnership all the more powerful.
I know this sort of might sound, lack of a better word, selfish, but sometimes like brands, like artists that are like emerging, they need financing. I know that sort of, I don't want to sound crass, but like a bank isn't looking to sponsor the next big grime artist because they want 20 current accounts being opened. Like, sometimes the artist just needs some funding. Like, if they give him 10 grand, or give him or her 10 grand, that's going to last that person maybe 6 months, and that can be studio time. In that time, they can make music, and then they can develop as an artist. Sometimes it's just that the relationship isn't like as clear as just one for one. It's like, here's some money, go do your thing. Yeah. That's it. Like, they're not looking really for. These banks are making silly money. You know, they're not looking for a return of investment on 10 grand given to, you know, some sort of grassroots funding. Sometimes, so sometimes there isn't actually any. They're not looking for anything back in return. Sometimes, so you've got to remember, like, partnerships can be for just the good of it. Sometimes.
I think. Sorry. No, I just think that Red Bull are actually a really good example of that, because if you look at their work with RBMA in general, and then with their recording studios, they don't actually make that much money from what they do on that side of things. They funded the recording of Little Sims' album, which was a really good thing of them to do, like, to give her all the studio time and to pay for it all. The album didn't charge. She's not like this huge deal. They didn't make much from that at all, but it's just from the point of view of people, just outsiders, and to her as well, you know, it's giving someone a leg up who wouldn't necessarily get it.
I think the last to say is, you mentioned makeup artists and stuff like that as well, brands and those kind of things that wouldn't be as obvious. I think they don't need to be like in your face like all the time. There's a really good book by a guy called Seth Godin, Purple Cow, which is actually about, like, these days a lot of people are curious themselves, like, and if you can appeal to their curiosity, they will go look into the stuff themselves. So for a makeup artist, for example, I don't know, I keep hearing something about is it Fenty, the Rihanna? Yeah, Fenty. So let's say you use Rihanna's Fenty or whatever makeup in your music video. I mean, I'm more maybe geared towards the women here, but like, you might be like, oh, I really love how she was starred. I really loved how that lighting kind of hit it, you know. It's not necessarily obvious. You don't need Fenty all over the screen, but people will go look into it themselves if it's done right, which is all I wanted to add.
Okay. I think we've got time for one more question. Did you want to?
Just a quick one. I think, from my side, the message to brands is really just play to your strengths. If you're a bank, you've got a ton of knowledge about how to manage money and finances, which is of value to artists of all sizes. If you're a makeup company and people are doing photo shoots, help them look good. Like, you don't need to go with these left field ideas and concepts. Just do what you're good at and share that knowledge and value with other people, and everyone's going to win.
Well, Gillian, there's a question there. Yeah.
Hello. Oh, yeah, it's on. It's kind of sort of leading on to lots of these things, and it was talking a bit about kind of Red Bull have been in the sort of music space for the last 10 years, and they have, I guess it's about sort of how do you actually measure success? So it's, if you're not in it for the next 10 years and you're trying to do something that is a bit quicker, and I guess maybe this question's a bit more aimed at Kevin, Ben, but if you're just a brand that's going out for something that's a bit of a kind of quick fix, but it is in an authentic space, how do you measure success?
I guess it's back to the brand or agency, right? And the first question, if we were putting a campaign together, is like, what does success look like for you? Is it sales? Is it noise? Is it reach? So I guess without knowing an objective, it's difficult to say how you put that together and then measure it. But I think it's just pairing the right artist or opportunity with what you want to achieve. And if that's noise and your office is saying we need this many impressions or this many sales, and then you put something together that you think is going to deliver against that. So I guess it's super unique to every different brand, artist, campaign. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, which is probably why some brands get it so right and others get it horribly wrong.
Yeah. Is my mic not working? Wearing a silly mic, it doesn't even work. Sorry, so marketing's this odd blend. I don't want to tell you guys this, but I'll tell you anyway. Marketing's this odd blend of magic and science. And a lot of the work we do in the creative space is more magic than science. And it's only really after the fact, you've got to believe in it and invest in it, but it's only really after the fact sometimes you see the results of it. And the results can often be not only in the impact you've had with the artist and the way they've gone on to grow and progress and build an audience of their own, which is what we want to achieve or help them achieve, but also that you'll get a huge amount of earned media through their audiences and through PR. That you'll also build a much greater affinity with your audience and their audience, and particularly the part where those audiences overlap is where you build a synergy and a much deeper meaning with that audience. So it's hard to measure, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't go after it.
We've got time for one more question, or I might ask the guys to sum up. Anyone? Oh, there's one there. Okay.
Hello. I suppose this is a question mostly aimed at Tara. You mentioned right at the start it was the relationship between the artist and the brand, and it's kind of the terms on which the artist makes the work.
Yeah.
But as a music writer and as a critic, when you know, or if you know, that a record or a gig or a tour or whatever has been put on with brand involvement, does that change the terms with which you review it? Do you have to kind of approach something which has an external kind of brand objective differently to one which is just about the artist promoting themselves and putting their art out there?
I think not really. I think for the most part, all you can see of a brand in that kind of space is, maybe you're only getting drinks served from that brand, or, the only bank machines are Barclaycard machines or something. It's not like like if it was really intrusive, then that would be an issue. If the artist came out like wearing, well, I can't really think of a funny example, but I think if it was really intrusive, then that would be the point at which, you have to take issue with it. But for the most part, I think you kind of have to appreciate the crossover. I think FKA Twigs is a really good example of an artist who she makes the most of her collaborations, and sort of the brands that she works with basically just seem to let her do what she wants with the money, but still kind of, she represents the brand in a certain way. She did a series of shows with Veuve Clicquot, and she brought in all this underground talent, and it was this weird art installation, you know, like you would expect a big brand like that to not necessarily be that interested in funding something like pretty left field, but I think it's to their credit that they did, and I think at the end of the day, like currently at least, you kind of just have to accept it. But maybe in a few years' time, like when that crossover, if it starts to be more intrusive, then you have to start taking issue with that.
I was just going to say that branding's sort of really grown in the last sort of, with the rise of Instagram and social media, branding has got so much bigger over the last 5-10 years. So in the same, like music's almost like the, you know, from the production side, and it's got more difficult. So from the marketing guy's side, you need to think of more, not like saying you don't, but I'm saying like over the years you've had to think of more creative ways to do the same thing almost. Like, oh, we need, ultimately it's just pairing up your brand with this artist, but it's not just, oh, let's send them a load of Nando's or send them some clothes or send them some Veuve Clicquot. It's like, okay, we've got to do an event. Let's put an event on. Like, who are we going to get? How much? You know, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's just making sort of best resource of the money. You know, because they could just say, here's 50 grand Veuve Clicquot event, and FKA Twigs could just take 49 grand home and just put 1 grand worth of talent. Do you know what I mean? Like, if they give it, you could do that, but like, whereas if you go and say, look, don't worry about that. Let's go get like the best lineup we can get. So it just you have to create experiences from the partnership as well, if that makes sense. It's just got to be bigger and better than it has been before. So there's both to think about on both sides.
Yeah, I guess it's like giving, like a brand being able to give an artist something they otherwise wouldn't be able to achieve. Like if you can do that, then I think there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
I think we're going to wrap it up now. That's a perfect way to end. Thank you. So I've been furiously scribbling notes because I've just been trying to come up with kind of a few key takeouts from all the different stuff that we've talked about today. So please do, guys, kind of chip in. But I think for me, you know, thank you so much to having brands here, but also from an audience point of view, from a journalism point of view, and from an artist point of view. I think it's really interesting to hear the kind of the diverse thought around this. And I guess the big takeout for me from a brand perspective is about being generous as brands. You know, if you can be in it for the long term, be in it for the long term. And that goes back to the point earlier about how you can actually contribute to that culture. A really good point around, as a brand, you know, doing what you're good at, and actually making sure that you're useful in the lives of artists, but also in the lives of their audiences as well. A really interesting point from you, Kev, about actually on both sides, not being afraid to walk away if it doesn't feel right. And I think, again, that goes away from the algorithmic way of talking about how you should partner with people and towards the actual human conversations that you should have if you're going to collaborate with this. And I think, you know, again, it's about the authenticity of that. So how you add value to all of those things. I don't know if anyone else wants to add any final thoughts on that. All right, thank you very much, everybody.